What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to Celio's Network. So Gustavo Wada's top 8 list from LAIC has finally been made public, and so here I am making a video about the deck. It's kind of similar to the DDG deck, but also not similar at all. So if you've already watched my deck profile on DDG's Naganadel Guzzlord deck, don't worry, this is pretty different. There's a lot of different cards. The strategies are fairly different, although some of the cards are the same. You'll see some similarities like the Reset Stamp and the Power Plants and things like that, but the engine's pretty different, and the desired turn 1s and turn 2s are also pretty different too. But before we get into all of that, I just want to tell you about PoTownStore.com. They are a sponsor of this channel. I'm very happy to be working with them. You can use code Celio for 5% off on their store. And also FlipsideGaming.com, where I write weekly free articles, and you can use code Celio, all caps, for 10% off of any order $10 or more over there. And if you are watching this over Thanksgiving weekend, both of those sites have some great sales going on. I think PoTownStore.com has up to 50% off on their site, and then code Celio works over at FlipsideGaming.com for 15% off this weekend instead of 10. So here is the deck list. Actually, Hunter Butler posted this deck list. He played the same deck as Gustavo Wada at LAIC. Unfortunately, he did not make day 2, while Gustavo did make top 8 with the deck. Like I said, there's a ton of differences between this deck and the DDG deck. So that's why I'm making a deck profile video for this deck when I've already talked about the DDG deck on the channel. They're using 3 Garchomp Tinas and only 1 Naganadel Guzzlord. And then also you'll notice some trainer differences, like only 1 Dusk Stone, only 1 Beast Ring. They are using Green's Exploration. So I'll talk a bit about why some of these kind of weird or unique inclusions are what they are, and how the deck works in a nutshell. So first, we're just going to take a look at all of the Pokemon. There's not too many. There's a 4-3 line of Mismagius, and if you don't know what Mismagius does, Mysterious Message. Once during your turn, you may draw cards until you have 7 cards in your hand. If you draw any cards this way, this Pokemon is knocked out. So it's both a draw engine, and it accelerates your opponent taking prize cards, so you can use cards like Counter Gain and Beast Ring and Reset Stamp to a greater effect. Garchomp and Giratina tag team. Mark Lutz actually used a Green's Tina Chomp Mismagius deck back for, I think it was a special event or possibly Cologne Regionals earlier this season. And I think they TEU'd with it. He said the deck wasn't very good and nobody should play it. But I did end up playing against it the following week in Elite Cup. I saw how the deck works, and it's this time around it's kind of similar, but I do think the deck is so much stronger right now. So Tina Chomp is a good frontliner for this deck because it has high HP and its attacks are actually fairly efficient, and its GX attack is pretty scary given the correct scenario. So linear attack for just a colorless does 40 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. Calamitous Slash for Psychic Fighting colorless does 160, and if your opponent's Pokemon already has any damage counters on it at all, this does 80 more damage. So if they have 1 damage counter on it, you're doing 240, put them up to 250. If they already had a linear attack on them, you're doing 280 total. And then GX, choose one of your opponent's Pokemon and discard all cards discard it and all cards attached to it. And then you'll never really get the 3 extra fighting energy, which would be discard 2 Pokemon and all cards attached to them. But GX can just remove a big threat, like if you're playing against Greenzard and they just have 2 Volks and then a 6 energy Reshi. GX their Reshi if you can't knock it out, and it's out of there. The other tag team in the deck is the Naganadel Guzzlord tag team, which has 280 HP. You can heal 60 damage from it by discarding a Pokemon from your hand, but in this deck, I don't think Violent Appetite will actually be used much. Honestly, this deck would probably prefer that Violent Appetite did not exist, because it's using the Green's Exploration engine, and Greens cannot be played if you have any Pokemon with abilities in play. But this deck does play 4 Power Plants, so you can usually just shut off Violent Appetite when you need to. It's really in here for its bulkiness at 280. It has Jet Pierce, which is a pretty efficient attack, 3 energy for 180. And of course, Chaotic Order, which is probably the best thing about this card. So you turn over all of your prize cards. And if you have an extra Psychic and an extra Dark energy, making it the same cost as Jet Pierce, you also take 2 prizes. So if you attach energy in Beast Ring, you can look through your prizes and then take 2. It's pretty cool, and given the correct scenarios, like we saw DDG play their deck, it was kind of built around taking 4 prizes with Jet Pierce and Beastbringer, and then Chaotic Order GX for the last 2. You can just, you know, take 4 prizes elsewhere with your Tina, Chomp, and maybe even the Mimikyu, and then go ahead and Chaotic Order for the last 2. So getting into the Mimikyu, it's really here for the copycat. If your opponent's Pokemon use an attack that isn't a GX attack during their last turn, use it as this attack. And so since this is a greens deck and you can just search out random cards you might need, or not really random cards I should say, but cards that aren't plungeful in the deck and that you might need at specific situations, and that might seem like random inclusions almost to an unobservant eye, you could just, you know, go grab your counter gain, or you can, even if you don't have greens, what's better is really Guzma Hala, because you can grab a special energy card and your counter gain and a power plant just to stick them with the power plant too while you're at it, and go ahead and use copycat. So Mimikyu's actually pretty strong here. And then lastly is Omastar. Of course, there's also the Fossil in the deck, but the Fossil does not count as a Pokemon. But Fossil Bind reads, as long as you have fewer Pokemon in play than your opponent, they can't play any item cards from their hand. So that's really good versus Birds and Dolls, since Birds needs to play Reset Stamp Chip Ice Axe, and Dolls need to play their Dolls. If you can just like stick a Tina Chomp active and have an Omastar on the bench and just swing until you're done taking your prize cards, really. So Omastar is very strong for those matchups. I'm sure you could probably find some niche scenarios where you might want it down in other matchups, but usually an ability on the board isn't great for you because you want to use your greens explorations. Onto the key trainers. There's a whole ton of trainers. You can look at the list for yourself, but these are just some of the ones I think are most important. There's the 4 greens exploration. Search your deck for up to 2 trainer cards, reveal them, and put them into your hand. And you can only play this card if you have no Pokemon with abilities in play. Conveniently, next is Power Plant. Pokemon GX and Pokemon EX in play have no abilities, so even if you have a Naganadel Guzzlord tag team on your board, you can just Power Plant and then go ahead and use Green's Exploration. But Power Plant is a very strong card. It stops Dedenne, it stops a Mewtwo and Mew tag team, and really, even if it just stopped at those 2, even if it just read Mewtwo and Mew and Dedenne have no abilities, you would still want to use this card. Those are just very relevant abilities to stop in the current standard meta. And Power Plant plus Reset Stamp, which we're playing 3 of, is a very lethal combo. If your opponent knocks out a Tina Chomp tag team, they take 3 prizes, they're down to 3. Then you pop one of your Mismagiuses, now they're down to 2 prize cards. You Reset Stamp them down to 2, you Power Plant and knock out their active Pokemon they have set up. Now they have to rebuild their board, or like find a couple vital pieces potentially, and all they have is a 2 to 3 card hand, and they have no GX and EX abilities at the moment, unless they can, you know, Reset Hull or Faba, or put down another stadium to replace the Power Plant. But yeah, Reset Stamp and Power Plant are a very lethal combo, and conveniently you can just greens for both of those cards all at once. Counter gain, and there's also the 1 Karate Belt. But counter gain, if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent, the attacks of the Pokemon this card is attached to cost 1 colorless less. And then Karate Belt is just, it reduces it by 1 fighting instead of 1 colorless. So this means that you can use turn 2 Calamitous Slash, which is pretty nuts, but I'll talk about that on the next slide. Next we have Guzma Hala, which is really convenient for this deck. I love it. Search your deck for a stadium card, but if you just, when you play this card, if you discard 2 other cards from your hand, you may also search for a Pokemon tool card and a special energy. Now let's just go back to the deck list for a second. there are unit energies, there's weakness guard energies, there's rainbow energies. So there are 5 possible special energy outs in the deck that you can be searching for, and you also have the 2 counter gains and the 1 Karate Belt as well. And then, of course, your stadium of choice that you're going to be searching for is Power Plant. So Guzma Hala for, let's just say, a unit energy and a counter gain and a Power Plant. So you just popped your Mismagius and you go counter gain unit energy to your Tina Chomp, and you played on your Power Plant, and you swing into them for 240 because you linear attacked them last turn, and you stop their powers, and maybe you even had a Reset Stamp in your hand. This deck just has super explosive turns. It goes from looking like a deck with just a Tina Chomp on board and an energy and swing for 40 to something, to you have no hand, you have no abilities, I just blew you up for 240 damage. It really does a lot at one time, and Guzma Hala helps it do that. Tag Call is really good for this deck, of course, since it can search Guzma Hala and your Tina Chomp both at the same time. This deck also plays the Mallow Lana, and like I mentioned, it has the Naganadel Guzzlord, which is a one of Pokemon. It's not really what the deck is focused on, like the DDG deck was. And then this is a huge difference, just 1 Dusk Stone. So the strategy behind a lot of these Mismagius plus tag team decks in the past, and like we saw with the DDG Naganadel Guzzlord deck, is just spam your Mismagiuses early to get your opponent down to a Reset Stamp plant like as early as turn 1, and try to get them into an unplayable hand. This deck doesn't mind going a little bit slower, and I think that is what's so good about it. So you don't have this big burst turn that you're looking for early, and if you miss it, you're like getting weaker as the turns go on. This deck actually welcomes a slower turn 1 and is looking for that turn 2 or even turn 3 where you really just take advantage of your opponent for taking a lead. And I also noticed some, after Hunter Butler shared this list online, some people were asking questions about it, like how do you excel energy and stuff with just that 1 Beast Ring, and how do you really pop off with just the 1 Dusk Stone? And he was like, oh, you just attach a manual energy, you know, go on with your turn. Like it doesn't have to be this big explosive thing. So that did work pretty well for Igor Costa and Jimmy Pendarvis with the DDG deck. They both top 16, I believe, with that. But Gustavo Wada did top 8 with this list. Now, there's not a huge amount of difference between top 8 and top 16, really, when you look at match records. It's just usually 1 or 2 match points. So both decks were very successful in their own right, but I do think this deck is much more rewarding to different situations, and I also think it's more adaptable to different situations. So going into what the strategy is of this deck, if you wanted to pick this up and try it out, I haven't personally picked it up and tried it out, but I have played a lot of other decks of this sort, of the Mismagius and Tag Team and Green's Engine kind of thing. So I'm just like theorying it out now, but if you did want to try it, these are some things you might want to keep in mind about the strategy. So you have the Green's Exploration Engine to search out specific cards. You want to disrupt your opponent with Power Plant and Reset Stamp. You're drawing cards with Mismagius, and you're searching your cards out, specifically with Guzma Hala and Greens. You have Counter Gain and Karate Belt, which allow for turn 2 Calamitous Slash, which that's kind of as aggressive as this deck goes. And I think that's actually really, really good. So if you go second and you linear attack 40, and then you go like pop a Mismagius Calamitous Slash for 240 since they already have damage, that's actually not terrible at all. And then the general sense of the strategy is disrupt your opponent turn 1 and turn 2, and then from there on you swing with big damage on a tanky Pokemon. Like I said, it's okay for this deck to go slower. You don't have to look for these this super aggro disruption turn 1 or turn 0 if you're going first. Like we've seen with like the Mew Handlock Exodia decks expanded, and also with the DDG version of this kind of Mismagius plus tag team deck. So just one more time, I'm going to show the deck list up here on the screen. I will have the exportable and importable version down below in the description. I actually typed this up from scratch from the picture that was shared online, and I also believe Limitless TCG has done the same and added it to their database from the tournaments. You can find all of the deck lists from LAIC on limitlesstcg.com. Click tournaments, and then I believe Sao Paulo Internationals, I believe it will be called. But yeah, so I'll have this exported into the description, and you can just import that in if you wanted to try it out. So be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and you want to see more content like this in the future. And I'll see you next time here on Celio's Network.